Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Backer and welcome to Off the Wall Novels. My co-host Pringle is currently coming out of his dungeon, so he might make an appearance here in a second. But I wanted to make a video because I had been thinking over a book that was a big inspiration on my second novel, Lionel, Lancet, and the Right Vibe, and for whatever reason, it called out to me that I wanted to revisit it. And so I didn't reread it, but I did page through it again. Here's our guy. And that book is The Undiscovered Self by Carl Jung. And it is cool because it was a profound influence on me at a very interesting, uncertain time in my life. And it influenced me beyond just my work on the novel, Lionel, Lancet, and the Right Vibe. But as I'm working on the Kingdom of Liminal Space, again, for whatever reason, it kind of called out to me. And also just with different things I've encountered in my life recently, it's been helpful to dip my toes back into Carl Jung, who is, although very dense, extremely inspiring, and every time that I consider his ideas, I always come away with something new. And so I think the biggest influence it had on Lionel, Lancet, and the Right Vibe was this idea of critiquing scientific rationalism. And that's something that I've been interested in probably since reading Gravity's Rainbow, where Pynchon gives us a bunch of different ways of looking at the world, in addition to scientific rationalism and the prevailing ideas and the time period that it covers. And so I was very primed to be into The Undiscovered Self. But Jung's basic point, at least at the beginning of The Undiscovered Self, is that in contemporary times, we rely too much on scientific rationalism and statistical thinking. And even though statistical thinking is very useful, it actually is an imperfect... It's an imperfect map of the world. And the example that he gives of that is that, let's say that you have 5 stones in your hand and each of them has a different weight. You could find the average weight of the stones and then no one of the stones might actually be anywhere close to that average that you've come up with. And I've actually posted this idea on TikTok before, and a bunch of statisticians were like, yeah, but we have a way of measuring for the standard deviation of each of the individual pieces in the category and how far they deviate from. And like, I don't think that's what Jung is getting at. I don't think it's a mistake in his understanding of statistics. It's actually a simpler, subtler, but more impactful point that you can have a piece of knowledge that does not describe the particulars of what a thing actually is. And that's just really fascinating to me because he obviously doesn't really care about the weight of stones. That's just illustrating the idea that within Pringle's feeling existential ennui. Come here. But within a contemporary society, since we have a mass culture, at least as described by Carl Jung, you can feel very insignificant as an individual, and you can know yourself just based on the categories that you fall into or your demographics, and it kind of erodes your individuality as a person. And he says that this kind of statistical or scientific rationalistic thinking as applied to the individual is very dehumanizing and depressing, and it just makes us feel insignificant. And so that is something that I've tried to capture. Pringle is so sad. That's something that I've tried to capture in Lionel, Lancet, and the Right Vibe, and specifically how that might send somebody down the alt-right pipeline because they feel insignificant, and especially as a young person, and you want to make your mark on the world, but you kind of compare yourself to everyone else, and it's truly staggering. And so also just in terms of society becoming extremely secular, we don't always have a good narrative to describe those internal aspects of ourselves that are not as easy to pin down with scientific thinking. And so I was really inspired by that for my first book, but like I said, for whatever reason, yesterday I picked it up again and just started flipping through it and was really struck by the idea of projection that he talks about in The Undiscovered Self, which is a extremely popular idea from Jung, but I think it's often misunderstood, or it's often looked at too narrowly, because the way that most people understand it is that projection is when there's a part of yourself that you can't accept, and so then you criticize it in other people, or you project it on other people and then make them an other, and you're like, oh, that would never be me. But what I found really inspiring on reviewing this concept is not just projection, but the mechanism that makes this possible. And it's actually far more cosmic and mystical, rather than just this inability to accept things in ourselves. Because he's talking about projection within the framework that every individual is the microcosm of society. And that might seem a little too hippy-dippy for some people, so I couldn't guarantee that I could convince you that every person is the microcosm of society, but if you find yourself skeptical of that idea, it should be uncontroversial to say that individuals are at least influenced by the society that they live in. And given that influence, it becomes clear that you are not just this atomized individual who can kind of pick and choose what societal influences apply to you. Rather, like, it kind of influences you whether you want it or not. Those boundaries between us and other people are extremely permeable, and the boundary between the individual and society at large are likewise very permeable. And so this is actually what makes projection possible, that when you are interacting with other people, you really have no other option than to interact with different versions of yourself. And to me, that is just absolutely mind-blowing, because again, when we talk about projection, it almost just feels like this psychological weakness or this like moral injunction to, take care. What's the biblical quote? Don't point out the speck in someone else's eye when there's a log in yours, or something like that. Like, that's, I think, the simplistic view of projection. But the bigger one is that it's like all of the divisions between individual people are illusory. And when we designate somebody else as an other, this is actually just a reflection of a split within ourselves. And this is, again, just what made Carl Jung such a genius, because it's not a terribly long book, but he is just dropping bomb after bomb in every single paragraph and finding all of these commonalities in a way that is just extremely inspiring and like really resonates with a lot of the layered symbolism that I've been reading about recently in the occult and in alchemy, where it's not these kind of big concepts that I have a greater deftness in dealing with, but it's like really specific, minute, detailed symbolism that you just find everywhere. And so he, in keeping with this idea of individuals being the microcosm of society, was saying that there is a correspondence, but also like a similarity in the way that the world is divided politically and the way that individuals are divided within themselves. And so he's saying that since humans have an unconscious, and since we have a shadow side that we do not accept and we project it on to others, this is actually related to political polarization of the left and the right. And then he was also writing, I think this was written in the late 50s, and so the Iron Curtain, he said, was like a broad historical version of this individual split within themselves, but that would I guess be more like macrocosmic, where the individuals are microcosmic. And so that is just so beautiful and mind-blowing to me, and it really connects the idea that individuals are significant, because they do have that correspondence with society at large, and it does make every individual seem to have like a lot more influence and a lot more sway. And then he says that resolving these political issues is a matter of individuals looking within themselves in order to resolve their unconscious biases and their unconscious like shadow side, and integrating that into their surface level personality. And so this is an idea that I find really interesting, but then I can't help but compare it to what a lot of conservatives say. And it even though it's an extremely mystical book and has a lot of criticisms of like right-wing ideology and religion, at least like popular religion, it does seem kind of conservative, or like you can see why somebody like Jordan Peterson is drawn to it, because it's basically saying like it's explicitly anti-communist, and I'm not sure that he gets too into the weeds with like whether true communism has been tried or not. Like when he says communism, I believe he's talking about the Soviet Union. So take that as you will, translate that in your head if you need to. But it is interesting to see that it's like he believes that the answer to a lot of political polarization is looking inside yourself as an individual and trying to integrate your shadow into your personality. And so that's a big reason why the book is called The Undiscovered Self, because it's this unconscious aspect of yourself that essentially splits you in two. And I think just that and other aspects of the book have made me reconsider this stuff a lot more recently, and also just that I'm a little bit more established in my career now. I just finished my first year as a teacher, and I have more time than I know what to do with here on summer break to just contemplate kind of where I've been and where I'm going. And for a long time, not having a stable career kind of prevented me from doing a lot of spiritual work. And I've also heard that just like a lot of men in their 30s, that's kind of the time when you reconnect with your ancestry and try to get into spirituality and try to resolve some of those issues for yourself. And so it seems like I'm right on schedule with that. But I've definitely just noticed in myself that I do have that kind of split personality, that I think, very bright and fun and chipper in a lot of ways, but then inevitably I get worn down. And so as a product of exhaustion, I think I become very closed off and reserved and resistant to spending time with other people. And that's not a version of myself that I particularly like. But in talking about these like split personalities and these darker aspects of ourselves that can come out, it just resonated so much with where I am in my life right now. And so I definitely recommend checking out that book if you guys are interested, because like I said, every single paragraph just has so much insight and a lot to consider. And even though I think it might stretch some people's credulity about what is traditionally real, it at least gives you a framework just for some meditation and reflection, even if you're not going to buy every single thing that he had to say. And I'll close on like maybe a small critique of Jung, because I love his ideas and he's such a brilliant guy, but I think the era that he was writing in the middle of the 20th century and early 20th century really pressured him to try to make his mystical ideas appeal to a scientific audience, even though he's critiquing scientific rationalism. And I have found a lot more clarity on these spiritual matters in the writers and like occultists and alchemists who are just going at it a little bit more directly, as opposed to trying to describe it within a scientific framework. And that is what makes Jung an interesting figure, but I think that's why a lot of his ideas are either discredited or not taken seriously today, because he was trying to, make it appeal to scientific rationalist people. And so I opened up another book of his today, on synchronicity, and it's so dense. And even though synchronicity is probably a more scientific idea that he's trying to talk about, or he's trying to describe, that it's not necessarily cause and effect, but it's these like correspondences between different events. And then he's laying out these like statistics tables and graphs and stuff, and it's like, it's interesting and it's cool that he felt compelled to do that, but I found the Undiscovered Self to be a lot more accessible, and then different occult writers even more accessible than Jung. So I'll go and end it there. I just wanted to make this quick video to just kind of share what's been on my mind recently, and if any of this resonates with you, or if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to leave a comment, like the video, share it with somebody, get into some cool conversations with your friends and family. And lastly, if you want to support this channel at all, feel free to buy Lionel Lancet and The Right Vibe, that is influenced by these ideas, and then also the Kingdom of Liminal Space, which is my concept album and novel that correlate. That will be coming out on Christmas. Also, I have an EP here on YouTube and on most streaming platforms called I Quit, and it is Danny Backer on most streaming platforms. That's all I'm going to say. Bye, guys. Have a good one.